England's Rugby World Cup 2019 campaign, the Finnish runners-up. I'm going to go through some of the results, some of their key stats throughout the campaign. I will have a quick word about the medals thing at the end because that seems to be in the news a lot at the moment. But mostly a breakdown of some of their key areas, what went well and what didn't. And yeah, you guys can let me know your thoughts at the end. So they started off their World Cup against Tonga. It was a pretty tough pool. The Argentina, France, Tier 1 nations playing in the Rugby Championship and Six Nations respectively, alongside the USA and Tonga, who by no means are minnows. The USA probably didn't perform to the level that we know they could have. Tonga beat some of the kind of pre-tournament perceptions and actually performed fairly well, coming close in their game against France. And this first game against England, 35-3, it wasn't a world-beating performance by any means. It was a solid win from England. Typical, I guess, for a first World Cup game where nothing is, well, not nothing, but it wasn't as fluid as you might expect things to go later on in the tournament. It wasn't as open as some of the warm-up games prior to the World Cup. I mean, Tonga got a real hiding from the All Blacks before the World Cup, but they didn't get an absolute hiding here. They still got beaten pretty comfortably, but there was no disgrace and that loss. So England looked good in that one without being great. They had a ton of run meters, 654 to Tonga's 199. They tackled pretty well, almost 90%. Their lineup was perfect. They made 16 clean breaks and conceded only one. So it was a game where Tonga really shored up their defence, but they still conceded 35 points, and England were able to really nullify pretty much everything that they threw at them. Their second game against the USA, 45 points to 7. Absolutely dominant. This one, the US, I don't know if that scoreline flatters them, maybe. It was, from my memory, it's a while ago now, but from my memory, it was one of the most one-sided games that you'll see. The stats kind of bear that out as well. England's 70% possession and 78% territory. They'll be disappointed, England, that they only tackled at 77%, which is maybe where England gets that 7 points conceded against them. It's a lot of sevens. But yeah, England were just 24 clean breaks to conceding 4. England did knock it on 15 times. But yeah, for the most part, that one was kind of plain sailing as well. Third game against Argentina, an Argentina side who had lost to France, who would be desperate to absolutely try and get some kind of win here. Not to be, man. England did a pretty comfortable job, 39 points to 10. The Lavanini red card kind of spoiled that game, but England still had to go and do a job. Sometimes teams get a red card and pick up, well, they kind of get, I guess they rally around it or something like that. But England went in and, got a very comfortable win in the end. The stats in that one, they dominated the run meters, 433 to 256. They had more possession, more territory. Tackling rates were actually pretty similar. Lineout was pretty similar. They did make 8 clean breaks and conceded 5. And Argentina in that one knocked it on 13 times to England's 4 knock-on. So I guess a lot of maybe throwing the ball around a bit too much for the Argentinians, but also a lot of pressure being put on by the English defence. Then you get, there's a cancelled game against France. That was kind of disappointing because all the talk prior to the World Cup was just how hard this run was going to be. If you're going to win the Rugby World Cup as England, you got to go Argentina, France, and then 3 really tough games. And it is a very hard road. I mean, the fact that they got this game cancelled probably did help out. Eddie Jones talked about it being a benefit for his side. And it probably was, because all the teams who had the break seemed to lift pretty well into those quarterfinals. So they did have the Wallabies in their quarterfinal, which is one of the tougher opponents to get. It's a rugby championship team. They gave the All Blacks a hiding this year as well, so by no means a foregone conclusion. Australia managed a fair few more run meters on them, and England lacked in territory and position. But as I've said before, so many games you see these days, it's the team with less territory and position that ends up winning the game. This probably comes down to also partly Michael Cheika's tactics, and he's defended them to the ends of the earth. It basically says, I'm not going to just play a game where I kick it all the time. I want to run it from everywhere. So live by the sword, die by the sword, I guess. So they got a lot of run meters. But they also lost 40 points to 16. So it was a really impressive result for England. The stats in this one I find don't do them justice. Like England did tackle at 90%, which is again phenomenal. They conceded more penalties than the Aussies. The Aussies line-out was better. I guess a key point is the Aussies created 14 clean breaks, even though England had a 90% tackle rate, but were only able to score 16 points. That speaks to the English defence. The English created only 8 clean breaks and were able to score 40. So that's finishing, able to convert penalties. I think Australia conceded 5 penalties in that game, but it was 5, and England kicked 4 penalties. So taking chances when they're on offer. But I think there's one more stat which really highlights where they had the absolute wood over the Aussies, and it's turnovers. England, overall turnovers including knock-ons, it's 18 conceded by Australia, 8 to England. But when you take the knock-ons out of it, so you're looking at guys turning the ball over the breakdown, line-out time, all that jazz, England had 11, Australia had 2. And that's Australia with the likes of David Pocock and Michael Hooper, who were only able to turn the ball over twice. And that's England with those young guys, Underhill and Curry, really able to just, dominate that area of the game. So, if you're an England rugby fan who's not feeling the best about this tournament at the moment, because it still is pretty fresh, a lot of young guys in that squad who are only going to get better from here on out. The game against New Zealand, again, very tough one. They managed to win it 19 points to 7. Interestingly, again, it's another Southern Hemisphere opponent. New Zealand get more run meters, 639 to 406. England actually have more possession and territory in that one. But England concede a lot fewer penalties, 6 to the All Blacks 11. England tackle again really well. It's in the 80s, but it's not the high 80s, so it's not as good as the previous game. They concede more line breaks. Once again, 12 to New Zealand that they managed to get on England, but only 6. But again, you look at that breakdown. Turnovers, excluding knock-ons. England managed to get 12 turnovers from New Zealand. New Zealand only managed to get 6 on England. New Zealand didn't play Sam Cane to start with. They decided to go with Scott Barrett. Cane is the fetcher. Barrett is not. Double the turnovers, plus the line-out turnovers. New Zealand's line-out for that one was 81%. England were at 90%. So causing New Zealand all kinds of problems in those areas. So going into this, they were looking very strong England team. They meet South Africa in the final. They can't get it done. It's pretty convincing, I guess, in the end to South Africa, 32 points to 12. The last 20 minutes were a bit of a killer for England with South Africa running in 2 tries. South Africa once again managed more run meters. So all these 3 teams managed to get the run meters on England, but this time it's the scoreline that is flipped. South Africa managed a higher tackling percentage, even though England were at 89. The penalties conceded, 10 to England, 8 to South Africa. So a lot of those were at scrum time. I know some people talking about the different techniques in scrummaging. I'm far from an expert to comment on about that. But either way, South Africa are the ones getting the decisions. Key area, though, I think for this one is I talked about how Australia and New Zealand were able to outdo England for clean breaks. South Africa did it kind of to another degree. So with Australia, they got 14, New Zealand got 12, breaking the defensive line of the English. South Africa only had 11, but England were only able to get 2 in return. So they had 8 against Australia, 6 against New Zealand, only 2 against New Zealand. And South Africa in the whole game. So yeah, and that key area where England were able to dominate against the Wallabies and against the All Blacks was the turnovers. Remember, it was 11 to 2 for the Australia game, 12 to 6 for the New Zealand game. They only managed 3 on South Africa, and South Africa managed 5 on England. So that's the one area where England kind of smashes these numbers, but it's at that game where it kind of comes to a bit of a grinding halt. So I still think there's a lot to like about this England team. You look at the overall numbers in the knockout stages. Their rate of pilfering was 8.7. They were conceding 4.3, so that's Very encouraging. They were conceding turnovers generally, including knock-ons, a lot less than the opposition. They weren't creating many clean breaks compared to their opponents in the pool stages. That was fine, but that's a different kettle of fish. Their line-out was generally operating pretty good, 88%. Penalties conceded and penalties won pretty much breaks even over the knockout stages. Tackling percentages, 86% is pretty good. Possession of territory, again, it's around about 50-50. But yeah, didn't quite go through to that last game. A lot of talk in the media beforehand was how it might be a game too far. I don't know, man. On its day, England's day for sure. They played absolutely astonishingly well in that New Zealand game, and then just the opposite was true. They met a team that was just too good for them on the day in that final. But like I said, there's definitely no hanging your head in shame about finishing second. I know you go there to finish first and everything else doesn't quite feel all that hot, but New Zealand didn't make the final, Australia didn't make the final, Wales didn't make the final, other teams didn't even make the semis. So if you compare this to the last World Cup where England didn't get out of the pool with their own World Cup, I think if you're an England fan, you've got to look at this and be at least hopeful for where the team is going, where they've kind of gone in the last 4 years. It's been a pretty good run with that one blip year out the way in 2018. But yeah, I mean, obviously, if you're looking at individuals, Itoje's work at the lineout was phenomenal. Curry and Underhill, like I mentioned at the breakdown, they are quite the pair. Billy V gave us what we expect from him at the back of the scrum. I thought Ford, for all the criticism he gets, had a very good tournament. I know they subbed him early in the final, but you don't judge just based off one game. I thought overall he was pretty good. So yeah, I would have liked to see more of Jonathan Joseph because he was playing really well as well. But yeah, that is what it is. And I guess for the medals, I know there's been a lot made about these guys taking off their medals, and there's a lot, at least in the non-English media, that makes them out to be really sore losers and whatnot. I feel like the non-English media does like to take digs at England wherever they can, and this is probably another one of those opportunities. I did go back and take a look at some previous World Cups to see what happened at the medal ceremony. For the 2015 one, when New Zealand beat Australia, they didn't focus much on the guys after they got the medal. But, I mean, there's one shot of David Pocock, who's, by all accounts, apart from being a phenomenal player, is just a genuine stand-up guy. He does great work like in Zimbabwe, where he's originally from. And, you know, just generally is really well regarded for the work he does off the pitch. He's got his medal in his hand as he is, you know, waving to the crowd and whatnot, so he's taken that off. Multiple of the other Aussie guys didn't have their medals around their neck. I don't remember a big furore about the Aussie guys being disrespectful and sore losers and whatnot and taking their medals off. I did read, and I didn't remember this myself, but I did read someone made a comment that in 1999 when New Zealand lost to France in that semi-final where they came back, that the New Zealand guys, most of them after the game, just really kind of left and went to hide out in the changing sheds and, you know, go through that process of, you don't want to call it grieving, but you know what I mean. But they said, and I read an article which kind of confirmed it, 6 of the players did stay on the pitch, shake hands with the French guys, and congratulate them on the win. But that's 6 out of the whole team. So it's not uncommon for a losing team to not react, I guess, in the perfect way. Obviously, it's a better example if you keep the medal on. And I did look at the 2011 World Cup where France lost to New Zealand. They all seem to keep their medals on. So that, if you're looking about setting an example for kids and whatnot, definitely that's the better example. That's the high road kind of thing. That's the better thing to be doing. But it's far from the first time that a losing team has taken off those medals in that kind of situation. So I think it's probably been blown a bit out of proportion, but I guess that's the way things go these days. So yeah, maybe in kind of a year or two, maybe even a month or two, those guys will start, you know, once they've kind of digested it all and they're back into their club season and whatnot, that you know, coming second won't seem such a bad thing, and when they're retired and whatnot, they can still look on that medal with a bit of pride, having played a pretty bloody good tournament. So, I mean, it's not like the Olympics where, second and third seem to be kind of celebrated. It is very much kind of a first or nothing thing. But, yeah, the All Blacks guys kept their third medals on, which was good. But there's a difference in that game where they were going out on a win, whereas this game, England had just lost the World Cup, so a lot of those guys probably not in the best place. But anyway, overall, I think if you were going to give kind of a grade to England, you still have to give them a pass, man, for making the final. Obviously, it's not nice to not win the final for that team, but as I said, compared to the last World Cup, this is miles ahead. To beat the All Blacks, beat the Wallabies, top of the pool, didn't lose a game until that final, despite one game cancelled, which was unfortunate. But yeah, you guys let me know your thoughts. You guys, let me know your thoughts on England's campaign, where you think they stood out. And as I said, there's a lot of young guys in that squad. Thakana Singa is going to be a phenomenal player as he develops as well. But yeah, how you think things are going to go. And yeah, I'll talk to you again soon. See you later.